Hello, one and all, and welcome to the SuperShow podcast. It's a podcast all about video games that I promise on this occasion will not devolve into a 2 hour long conversation all about aliens. And joining me and making sure we keep that promise is my level headed friend, my anti conspiracy co host, a man whose name is a total coincidence on this occasion. It's Mr. Alex Jones. How are you, sir?
I have not been taken by the aliens to go work on their spaceship yet, so I'm happy. I'm still here, still raring to go.
Have you been given a date yet before you have to go and testify before Congress as to all the things, all the biological matter you've seen?
Imagine they somehow mixed up me and the other Alex Jones, and I got to go and do something like that. I'd do it anyway. I'd go for it. I'd just be like, I'll be there. I'll be there.
I'd be in full support of you as well. It'd be the best thing that ever happened to this podcast. We'd get at least 10 more viewers on YouTube. Who knows how many? The possibilities are endless.
I feel like my testimony would be as credible as the guys who just testified in America as well. So I think that'd be fine.
We'll have to get into that later. I feel like you could also, it would give you a great platform to make some joke about how you have been in contact with biological matter from outer space, but all it was is one time you didn't have a wank for 3 weeks and your cum shot technically left Earth's atmosphere for like 3 seconds. So it was extraterrestrial semen.
See, you've stitched me up here now. You'd love to do this because now I have to try and think about whether or not in the first 5 minutes we have violated YouTube's terms of if it's appropriate for all audiences, because you don't say fuck or bugger in the first 5 minutes.
Well, hang on, you have just sworn, my friend. Let's do a little recap. What did I say?
Intergalactic cum shot.
Cum shot is a biological term. Open up any biology book in schools around the world and you will read about cum shots. The other word I said was semen. Even more biological.
Imagine how incensed the right wing would get if not only did their biology books say woman is anyone who says they are, but also but intergalactic cum shots are perfectly right. They'd lose their minds.
Yeah. I feel like everyone, that's the point of, it's a fact of life. Everyone sits down with their parents and they have the birds and the bees conversation. They learn about how the birds do their cum shots.
Fuck the bees.
Yeah, exactly.
I must admit, I've never understood with the birds and the bees. When I first heard it called that, it was after I'd had the talk about the birds and the bees, and then someone said the birds and the bees talk, and I was like, do birds fuck bees? Like what?
It's a good point. I genuinely, I have no insight into this whatsoever. Are they just two animals that fuck a lot or reproduce a lot?
The irony is they don't have to, but I don't. Okay, I know how humans do it. I've got no idea how birds or bees do it. So I've not had the birds and the bees talk because no one's told me how bees reproduce. I feel like something would be interesting as well because they make honey and they're really busy, and most of them are female, right? There's like very few males in the bee colony.
Oh, you're asking the wrong guy. I'm not a bee expert. We used to work with a guy who was allegedly a bee expert. We should bring him on the podcast one day. He also had Tourette's, which would have made for an interesting combo.
I don't think he was a bee expert. I think he just loved bees. Are those two things the same?
You know what? I think by modern standards, I think there's a very fine line between being a bee expert and loving bees. I think, especially in the internet age, it's like video games, Jonesy.
If you love
video games, you might as well be a video game expert, or at least be able to make yourself out to be online, like we do on platforms like YouTube, where you can watch the video portion of this podcast, not just as a VOD, which is a video on demand for those not in the know, but you can also watch it live, which is what we are right now. I'm sure, Jonesy, I can see your eyes wandering south. There might be some good folks in the comment section, or the chat, I should say, already. Is there anyone you want to say hi to?
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to Classy Cat, who said it is appropriate. I'm an adult, so we can be as lewd as we want and talk about bees and birds doing all sorts of kink stuff to each other. And Classy Cat doesn't mind because Classy Cat's an adult, so it's all good.
We got Classy Cat's permission, folks. It's cum shots for everyone. Celebrate cum. It's raining cats and cum shots. I don't know. We'll figure it out. And you can help us figuring it out by joining in the conversation. You might want to leave a comment in the comment section on YouTube when this goes up as a video. That's if you're not in the live chat, as already mentioned. And you might also reach out to us on social media. And Jonesy, we're going to have to get used to a different kind of preamble at the beginning of all these podcasts, because now our X handle is at SuperShow Pod.
I can't do I'm sorry, I didn't mean I shouldn't have done that. So a bit of behind the wall, we used to do this symbol to show each other that something had messed up, technical difficulties, and we had to pause the recording of the podcast. So when I just then I was suddenly thought, shit, Jamie's going to suddenly think I'm trying to end the pod like a child has wandered into view or something.
For anyone on an audio platform such as Spotify, iTunes, or Google Podcasts, Jonesy and I are crossing our forearms to make an X shape when we are referring to the symbol that we're throwing up. Something that prior to this podcast, I solely used to do to remind Simon Cowell that I didn't have the X Factor. Unfortunately, that fell on deaf ears. X Factor.
X Factor. Yeah. It always still makes me think of wrestling. Wasn't there like a team of wrestlers who used to do the X thing?
Didn't they do it to the south though as a crotch chop? They used to cross their arms and was that an NWO thing?
I don't know who it was. I'm guessing X-Pac was one of them, given he's got X in his name, but I don't know.
Oh, we need Dave Horner here on moments like this. He'd whack me over the head for not knowing this. I know Triple H was involved. I'll put it that way.
I know. I bet Paul from Paisley Radio would be able to set us straight as well if he was around. But he's not.
Yeah, exactly.
He's a wrestling fan, I think.
Massive radio fan and also proprietor of PaisleyRadio.com, a fine website where you can listen to this very podcast in digital radio podcast format on Thursdays at 10 p.m, repeated again on Mondays. So if anyone wants a fun little alternative way to experience this very product, PaisleyRadio.com, home of X-Pac enthusiast Paul.
I think as well, if anyone watching would like to, there's a game you could play this week, which is as you're watching, you could note the number of times that Jamie flubs a word and put something else in, because as he's actually said already to me a number of times that his brain is like restarting and he's not quite there yet. So already we've had Goggle podcasts and Paul radio fan Paul. So instead of wrestling fan, so there's two in the opening 5 minutes.
Well, okay, so I've had a long day at work. I jumped on my computer this evening, getting ready to record a broadcast a podcast, no less. And in the 15 minutes that I had to wait for Jonesy to come onto Discord, I fell asleep. You know, one of those sleeps. I won't recreate it because there is a video portion of this product. But you know, one of those sleeps where your head goes backwards, your mouth is as wide as it can possibly be open, and every now and then you make like a noise.
Yes.
Like you're deep throating.
Yeah,
I know. Yeah. It was
the worst is when you're on like public transport and you do that, and then you wake yourself up with the and then you sort of look around and you know everyone heard you, but people pretend they haven't, and you just have to go,
God.
Oh no. Yeah,
that's the worst. Perhaps the only thing worse than that outcome would be immediately having to record a podcast moments afterwards, which is the situation I'm very fortunate to find myself in. So thank you, Jonesy, for reminding or letting the good folks at home know of my situation. And yeah, keep an ear out for flubs. Maybe make a note of them in the comments down below. That will do wonders for my confidence and my self-esteem.
It's only humorous because you are usually so on point that there wouldn't be any. It wouldn't be fun. But the fact that you are tired and you are very hardworking and you've had already a long day at work makes it just, it gives us a one-time occasion to enjoy a little bit of humor at your expense. If it was, it wouldn't work if it was me, because I mess it up. I mess up all the time anyway, so it'd be boring. It would be like part of the course. But with you, not so much. There we go.
That's very kind of you, Jonesy. And you know what? If you're wondering whether or not you could get out of that little hole you're in by using flattery, the answer is you absolutely could. Yes. You also reminded me, you know who else is constantly tired because of how diligent and hardworking they are doing long hours?
The King Charles III.
Not just him. I mean, you don't get fingers like that without putting a few hard shifts in. I was thinking about Japanese people, and there is nothing more Japanese. Nothing says hardworking and long hours and sleeping under your desk in the name of video games more than our old pals Nintendo. I say pals, even though they are a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and they're not our friends. And because they're not our friends, Jonesy, we're going to spoil some of their secrets on this very podcast. Alleged secrets. How does that sound?
That sounds good. I like that.
Good. I'm glad you like that.
I apologize for the strange noises. I'm not taking my trousers off, I promise. I'm loosening the boot, the Robocop boot.
Loosening the boot also sounds like a euphemism, though.
It does. Yeah. No. I've got one RoboCop leg, as my leg is screwed up at the moment, as some people may know, and it was getting a bit tight, so I just have to slacken the Velcro.
You see, again, everything you're saying right now just sounds like a euphemism. I need to, it's like you're wiggling your eyebrows as you're saying, I'm going to slacken the Velcro, if you know what I mean.
Yep. Well, believe what you'd like.
Do you know what I like to believe? That every single insider and person that comes up with rumors and leaks from the world of video games is accurate, and that means that we can talk about them on this podcast without feeling like frauds. Although, as it goes, Andy Robinson and the fine folks at VGC have a pretty strong track record when they do put their money where their mouth is, and that is exactly what they've done with that aforementioned Nintendo rumor, which, unsurprisingly, Jonesy, given how long it's been since we've had the Nintendo Switch in our hands in our houses, revolves around Nintendo's next-gen console and when it might come out. So, shall I hit you with a little bit of background info?
Please do.
And I'll warn you, and the folks at home, and the folks maybe not at home, maybe on the move, at work, commuting, that some of this is going to sound obviously not confirmed, but maybe a little bit predictable. But we're going to get into some other potentially slightly more juicy stuff in a little bit. So supposedly, allegedly, I'm going to keep throwing words like that into the mix so we can't get sued. Development kits for Nintendo's next console are now with key partners, with a launch planned for next year. We're apparently, Jonesy, looking at the second half of 2024. For anyone wondering, I believe the Nintendo Switch came out in Oh God, I'm doing it. 2017.
Let's do some on the fly double checking. 2017, maybe 18. I don't know.
I was thinking 16 or 17.
March 3rd, 2017.
Hey, there we go. Which, of course, means that in the second half of 2024, it would have crossed the 7-year mark, which would make sense for a generational leap. One thing that apparently is being reported by VGC at the moment is that they are currently already kind of getting up to scale when it comes to the production and the manufacturing of this new hardware. They want to make sure they have what has been described as ample stock available on day one. They don't want to have any pitfalls that the Xbox and the PlayStation brands had around the launch of the PS5 and the Series X and S, where you just couldn't get your hands on them for love nor money. Then, though, Jonesy, we get a little bit deeper into VGC's reporting, because, as I said, a lot of the stuff thus far is kind of, if not obvious, then just guessable, right? Like, a lot of people wouldn't be surprised if new Nintendo hardware came out next year. But VGC have cited two sources that have given, I'm going to say, some slightly underwhelming pieces of information about what Nintendo's next handheld console could be packing. First of all, it's important to stress that there will still be a portable mode. That, again, isn't that surprising considering the Switch's success as a hybrid console. One thing, though, that the sources are alleging at the moment is that the console could launch with an LCD screen instead of the more premium OLED in order to bring down costs. Jones, considering that Nintendo touted the OLED as such a big feature of what has essentially been the only upgrade they've done on the Switch thus far, is that kind of like, not a slap in the face, but is that kind of like downplaying something they've already played up for marketing terms?
No, not at all. It makes complete sense. Like, I think when you consider the people that are going to buy this, how people are going to buy this, I don't think that makes any difference to people buying, the next gen Switch, where the fact it's got an LCD versus an OLED, and it just means that they can very easily move into a premium version of the next gen Switch by saying, now there's one with an OLED screen that they drop, a few years after the fact. Like, I don't think this is that surprising.
You think they could do another mid like a Switch 2 OLED kind of deal?
I've no idea if they would have planned it through, but I think that makes total sense for them. Like, I don't think anyone's out there saying, do you know the real thing that holds the Switch back? It's the LCD display. Like, there's a lot of other issues going on with it. If you're talking about, saying there's problems with the graphical fidelity, like frame rate, storage capacity, all that sort of stuff, any of that stuff can get fixed. That's going to be more important than putting a more expensive OLED screen onto the thing. So no, it makes total sense to me. And I think the issue we've got these days as well is you've got to consider inflation and interest rates and all that sort of bollocks. And it's going to hurt when they're building these units. It's going to hurt how much they come out for anyway. Like, cost of living, people are going to they're going to say, ouch, because even if these things came out at the same kind of level that the Switch would have come out at in 2017, it's still going to feel like a decent markup because they're going to be paying, I don't know, 10-20% more for for components. You've got to
Yep.
imagine, and they're going to be passing that on. So yeah, keep it cheap if you can.
I mean, I think they'll be desperate to, right? I feel like part of Nintendo's newfound reputation in the Switch era sort of hinges on them being the most accessible and the most affordable home console on the market. I mean, if they went anywhere near PS5 and Xbox Series X prices, which even as we speak are kind of coming down, I think the PS5 had its first price drop in certain territories in the past week or so. That would not be a good look considering how powerful we've got to imagine a potential Switch 2 would be, given not just the fact that it is still a portable, or at least has the potential to be a portable console, as we discussed, Jonesy, but also that, like its predecessor, this console will accept physical games via a cartridge slot. Now, obviously, handheld consoles experimentations with various kinds of other media, like I'm thinking about the PSP and UMDs or whatever they were called, hasn't always worked. But is there any part of you that hears about another another 7 years of Nintendo game cartridges and goes like, really? Does it feel antiquated to you, or am I being harsh?
I think the irony with the slot is they could. I almost feel like it could be a massive selling point for them. Like if you could put the entirety of a game, every aspect of that game is mounted on the cartridge, and the cartridge itself was like a SD, or like a Jesus Christ, I can't even think what it's called, like an SDD or whatever, like a little insertable, super fast drive, so solid state drive. You could actually have that would be the best of both worlds, right? You wouldn't have to install anything on the console. Everything got installed on the game cartridge. So let's say you update a game, the game cartridge got updated. I think that would be wicked. Like if you could do that, if you never had to worry about console storage, which is a problem they're going to have. Individual SD cards are cheap as shit nowadays anyway. So if you only had to have like a, I don't know, 5 gig or a 10 gig little SD card that you basically slotted in the back, I think there's legs in this medium.
Wouldn't this still work the same way as the Switch does, though? Which is that,
of course, but I'm saying they could
cartridges and installs just on the system.
Yes, but what I'm saying is the system of installing the cartridges, I think, has legs for the future. I think once they realise the strengths of this, you never fill up your console, whatever. I think we'll be seeing this for years to come with Nintendo.
Hang on, I'm confused. Why wouldn't your Switch get full? Like all the cartridges install on the device.
So I'm saying is because you were saying, is this antiquated? Do we think this will change?
Yeah.
I'm saying I would be more surprised if it didn't go in the opposite direction, and if they came up with a better way to use the cartridge system in order to hold the data for the game separately to the console itself, so that whenever you wanted to play a game, you literally inserted it in, and it just ran like smooth as butter, and you could just go, and everything was ripping along, and you never had to worry about storage space. And they add the price to the cartridge costs you 60 bloody quid anyway, and the fact that SD cards get us, now they cost you a couple of quid to buy. Why would you not go in that direction? Like put more on the card, more on the card.
I agree, but I just feel like everything about this generation has told us that most companies outside of Nintendo want to do less and less. And I mean, we've already had the controversies, haven't we? Where like, I can't even remember the numbers, but it's something weird like the 64 gigabyte Nintendo Switch cartridge is so much more expensive than the 32 that some companies just put as much as they can on that. They fill the 32 and deliver the rest of the game via a patch or via a download. And so there are loads of games out there that you need an online connection to play because it has to download the other half of the game that's not on the cartridge.
And that is annoying. Like the connectivity of the Switch as well always seems really slow to me. The fact that you can just buy insertable cards into it yourself is obviously a benefit. You can just get a bigger SD card. But it's annoying. It's a shit way of doing it. Like if you're going to use cartridges. Go ham. If that's what I would say. Yeah, I'm hoping they go backwards, mate, and they end up with a big SNES cartridge, and they plug it into the back, like almost like what was the old like the cheat cartridge thing that was this horrendous big block?
Game Shark.
Game Shark. I almost want something like that, like hanging off the back of the Nintendo Switch 2, just for shits, and you've got to blow into it like you used to if it stops working.
Also, didn't the early DSs and maybe even mid-range DSs. I can't remember. Didn't they have a DS card slot on the top and like a Game Boy Advance slot on the bottom?
Oh, I don't
Because
know.
that I feel like that was how they did Game Boy backwards compatibility. Is that Nintendo DSs at launch had like a Game Boy Advance slot on the bottom, so you had slots on both ends. And I don't know. I thought that was kind of cool. I don't know how Nintendo would make use of that, but I don't know what the relevance is to the Switch 2, but.
I think so, because like realistically, the problem Nintendo have still got is trying to keep prices down. If you want to have an onboard SSD, that's a no go. Fine, have an HDD if that's all you need for like the speed of the games, etc. But that's what I was saying before. Like, if you can get away with having a fast and SD card effectively as a cartridge, because they're about the same sort of size, aren't they? Why, if you were Nintendo, wouldn't you lean into that? Like, if that was the case.
And of course, like we see other handhelds like the Steam Deck showing that very fast SD cards are extremely capable as a form of storage for downloading and running digital games, chunkier games than the Nintendo Switch handles, right? So
yeah,
I do see your argument.
It's the only thing I suppose you'd have obviously, because Nintendo now have the eShop, which you do download stuff onto, so you do have that as an issue, but then you've always going to have that problem of do Nintendo really want to put on a big onboard storage unit or whatever? Like, and no, because it's costly. It's going to make the thing heavier. It's going to make. I just think they're going to, they're going to try and keep costs down, and they're going to try. So cartridges make sense, I suppose, in that sense as well.
Yeah.
If you want people to keep with the cartridges,
we're also going to have to keep tabs on the power of the Switch 2 and what that essentially enables games to be in terms of size, if that makes sense. Because you think about so the Switch at the moment comes with 32 gigabytes of internal memory. Like if you just go out and buy a Nintendo Switch, Call of Duty on the PlayStation 5 could be 4 times that on its own, right? So they're also going to have to adhere to the kind of the changing standards of the games, which in turn is going to depend on what the actual specs of the Switch 2 are and kind of what kind of visuals, for example, we're pushing and what kind of performance we're pushing. And that's the thing we're a little bit short of at this stage, given what has been leaked in terms of what information has made out.
I think it is weird to kind of think that no matter what they do, like a decent upgrade to the Switch, you're still talking about, I don't want to be mean, but you're still talking about like what, mid-level, at best, mid-level PS4 kind of.
I think that was the vibe, right? It's like mid PS4, yeah.
Like you're not sort of saying, we're not talking about like challenging the actual next gen as they are at the moment, which is why it's always weird to talk about next gen with Nintendo, because it's next gen for them, but it's not compared to anyone else. But then, hey, maybe that's also the thing with console. Like we talk about next gen with console, and then you get all the PC gamers laughing at you because we're so far behind where they're at as well. We did have a question from Chris Taffy, or Tafe, I don't know how to pronounce it, in relation to this. And I think I know the answer to this for both of us, but I'm going to throw it out to you. He said, okay. Assuming like what we think the Switch 2 will be, will we both upgrade to a Switch 2?
Yes. I think that I might get around to it, at my own pace, depending on what the software lineup is like. But in this day and age, especially for you, I've got to imagine with the pressure you're going to get from your kids and your whole family, maybe potentially. But over the course of a generation, like 7 years is a long period of time to not own a Nintendo platform, given the quality of the first party software that they produce. And we know that like we've seen a little bit of kind of what we're going to be rounding out the Nintendo Switch era with. Actually, I don't know much about 2024, but we've seen things like Super Mario Wonder and stuff like that still really excite me. And it's one of those things where if they start talking about Nintendo Switch 2 at some point next year, and the next 3D Mario is ready, for example, then I have to be there. Like there's no world where I don't play the next 3D Mario day one, even if that means buying a console for it. I just think over the course of a generation, it's assuming you keep up with their first party output, it's hard to regret buying a Nintendo platform.
And I'm completely aligned with you. Like, yeah, we'll be getting one. I don't even think it will probably, but not like straight away, but like probably within the first 6 months that they release. Like the reality is, it's played in my house daily. It's and the good thing about Nintendo is it's like a solid platform, especially with kids. They love like the a lot of the first party stuff, like they lot of the playability, how good it looks. There's never a question of oh, this isn't as good as PlayStation 5. This isn't as good as this. Like they don't care. It's just about fun. So at the moment, like they love things like Super Smash Bros, Bowser's Fury, like they've been playing recently.
Kirby gets a lot of love, right?
Kirby gets a lot of love. Like it's all that kind of game. It's a lot of like very high end and not like necessarily pushing the envelope, but it's very high end Nintendo, like very playable, just very well made games.
Yeah.
And so when you say that, hey, more of that on the Switch too, I'm like, of course, yeah, of course, that's it's going to be a no brainer for me.
Absolutely, especially as that first party catalog grows. Although one thing that is a bit of a strange caveat to bring up in the early stage at least of the Switch 2 before that first party catalog starts to grow is certain question marks around backwards compatibility that I don't know about you, Jonesy, but I felt like that was just a foregone conclusion with the Switch 2. Like, of course, every Switch game, or whatever this console ends up being called, I keep calling it the Switch 2, I'd imagined every Switch game has to be playable on it. That's just the way my mind is programmed
Surely.
now. And I don't know how seriously we take these sources. The LCD OLED sort of dispute suggests to me that these sources might be on the manufacturing side of things, and so maybe don't have the most up-to-date information on what's actually going on with the console. But I will read verbatim from this VGC article. Other details such as backwards compatibility support for Switch games, brackets physical and digital, remains unclear. Some third-party publishers are said to have expressed concern that legacy support for Switch titles could negatively affect sales of next-gen titles, which I suppose is still is a going concern every time a generation incorporates backwards compatibility. But I don't know about you, I felt, Jonesy, at some point the pendulum swung, and the idea that the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One launched without backwards compatibility seems so foreign to me, because by the time the PlayStation 5 and slightly more obviously, the Series X and Series S launched, backwards compatibility seemed like a must, and it was never even in question. And now that's kind of just the world we live in, for want of a better way of putting it. Surely there's no world in which a Switch 2 comes out in 2024 and Tears of the Kingdom isn't playable, right?
That
Ooh.
I agree with what you said. However, I could see Nintendo doing it. Like
Okay.
I'm just trying to think because the thing with Nintendo will be so I think there's a little bit of a difference with say like PlayStation with 5 and 4 and the fact you couldn't get hold of the games and the fact that we're still making intergenerational titles and they kind of are patched for 5 often. They're not like often just outright PlayStation 5 games. I feel like Nintendo will just go to Nintendo Switch 2. And so I could see more of a thing of like, oh no, we just don't make Switch games anymore. Like it's Nintendo Switch 2, and they will expect people to just go out in their droves and buy the Switch. If anyone was going to do it, I think it would be Nintendo. I'm torn. I don't know one or the other, but I think if anyone was going to do it, it'd be Nintendo. To be like,
I see.
no,
I feel like they're kind of the opposite. I know they've had weird generational shifts before, usually around times where they've changed the physical media they've worked with, i.e., like going from cartridges to those mini discs for the GameCube, between from the N64 to the GameCube, where it's like there's not much you can do to make a cartridge backwards compatible.
yeah.
We kind of consumers will understand that. I just feel like if this is another handheld or hybrid console with a cartridge slot that is even has any shared DNA with the Switch, I feel like they're in for a world of hell, especially if they start trying to re-release these games, which I know they do a lot of, and I know they did a lot of this generation with Wii U titles. But the Wii U felt different. It felt like a strange console that not a lot of people bought, and even fewer people liked. And there was a lot of software that went underappreciated as a result. Kind of made sense. The idea of like a Switch 2 port of Tears of the Kingdom, for a essentially fundamentally very similar console, It sounds dicey. That's all I'll say.
I think the thing that makes me think it, two things that make me think it won't happen is the eShop. So, for example, now that you can buy a lot of games digitally for Switch, which obviously never been a thing before, then what do? Do you say, "Oh no, you own this game in the eShop, but you can't play it on your Switch 2, so you have to buy a new version, even though you have access to the Switch 1 version"? Like, I can't really see that happening. That seems weird to me.
Agreed.
But then at the same time, I suppose it's tricky because then part of me is like, but maybe they turn around and say, we don't want people playing Switch games on the Switch 2 because the Switch 2 is so much better, and we don't want. Then would they do? I don't think they'd do that. Like, I think I'm 50-50. I think I'm really on the fence with it. I could see them doing it, but at the same time, I don't think it's that likely. But then I'm in the middle. I'm in the middle.
That's fair. That's fair enough. I won't try and nudge you off the fence in either direction. I respect that. I don't have any insight onto like what a Nintendo like thing to do would be in this situation, because I feel like they themselves have gone back and forth on certain issues. There's just something about the generational shift that we're sort of approaching for Nintendo's platforms that feels like you can't leave a lot of those titles behind. And I think you very aptly mentioned the eShop. The idea that, especially because I think they're working on franchises that are going to continue, the idea that like another Splatoon comes out and you own the previous Splatoon and you can see it there, like in your library, for want of a better way of putting it, but you can't download it. You have to go and pick up a fundamentally what I'm going to imagine, I'm going to presume, is a very similar piece of hardware, but just inferior. Pick that up and play an old Splatoon game on that. Splatoon's a weird example because obviously it's it's an online, primarily PvP game, so people don't go backwards very often. But yeah, I think my gut reaction is that it will have backwards compatibility, but I do think there's going to be some Nintendo strangeness about the way they implement or the way they make usage of the hardware upgrades that we're inevitably going to see to make certain games run better. Like, I love the idea that the Switch 2 comes out, and I'm going to pick on it again because it's recent and it's relevant. Tears of the Kingdom gets a patch that all of a sudden makes it run at 60 frames a second and a higher resolution. I don't know that Nintendo are going to go back and do free work or essentially unpaid work to make legacy titles better on newer hardware in the same way that Xbox and PlayStation have done at times.
But you know what they would do is they would come out
re-release it.
They would re-release it, and they'd say, if you want to play the ultimate version of Tears of the Kingdom, you need to buy the upgraded version, and you have to pay $65 for the privilege.
Yeah, and like maybe that's where some of this reporting gets dicey. Like, maybe backwards compatibility is a thing, but there is also a Switch 2 version of Tears of the Kingdom, and that's the only one that actually looks or runs better. I know that's a horrible thought. Going back to the PS5, and Sony were patching some of their games like Ghost of Tsushima and The Last of Us and Days Gone to be like, yeah, it's going to run at 60 frames a second now, or whatever. Like, we're gonna release free patches that take, and of course they did then sometimes release paid upgrades. Like, a lot of those games got director's cuts with additional content and even more fleshed out packages for next gen. But even then, they were at reduced costs, and it's messy.
It is messy. I say one interesting thing. Obviously, we don't know the specs of the Steam Deck, the Switch 2 yet. But I was going to say, like, it will be interesting if it comes closer to the ability of the Steam Deck, and sort of closes that gap a little bit with regard to third-party software. You got to imagine it's not going to get that close.
I think pricing, right, becomes the issue.
Pricing, but I think it definitely comes closer. No, exactly.
It has to come closer. Yeah.
You do maybe start to talk about some viable titles which seemed kind of like, well, Jesus, you wouldn't want to play that on a Switch, even though it was possible to. Some titles maybe are, hey, actually, it's not too bad. It doesn't run too badly on the in the handheld version of the Switch 2.
Very much, yeah.
Much more affordable.
I don't exactly know when manufacturing would start, but the thing that also further backs up your point is the Steam Deck at the time of recording is over a year old, and the Switch 2, one would presume, is over a year away. And that's a lot can happen in 2 years in terms of the hardware market, where components like perhaps the same components that are in the Steam Deck that I don't know. I know this isn't exactly how it works, and Nintendo will use different components from different places, and some of that stuff will get made bespoke. But put it this way, things get cheaper. Things over time, generally speaking, when it comes to technology and hardware, things get smaller and cheaper and thinner and quieter and so on and so forth. There's always going to be the high end, which is always going to be the most expensive, the most hefty, the most heavy, the most loud, the most heat generating, side of the hardware market. But yeah,
it's almost genius.
That's why, as we talked about last week, over the course of generations, consoles get slimmer, sometimes 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, it's kind of the genius of Nintendo's model, because what Nintendo have said is, we don't want to be the cutting edge of the tech and be heavy and loud and expensive and fast. We want to be, slim and sleek and usable and playable and portable. So we'll just wait a few years. We'll be at this point, we'll be 4 to 5 years behind the cutting edge, and our shit will work really well.
Yeah, which it's not a bad selling point, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah. Right. That's Nintendo. Let us know in the comments down below. Let us know in the chat, if you're live with us now, whether or not you would pick up a Switch 2. And I wonder, I was going to do a thing, Jonesy, where I was going to throw over to you and ask for you for any predictions about when this console might release, month-wise, obviously, presuming the 2024 rumor is true. But I'm going to give you a little bit of insight that might show you what I'm seeing via Wikipedia, that actually it's not that interesting a guess, because whilst the Nintendo Switch came out in March of 2017, okay, which is interesting, if we ignore that, let me know if you see a theme here. PlayStation 5, November 2020. Xbox Series XS, November 2020. Xbox One, November 2013. PlayStation 4, November 2013. Wii U, November 2012. Wii, November 2006. PlayStation 3, November 2006. Xbox 360, November 2005. Xbox, November 2001. Anything stand out there, perhaps, as a word that I said more times than you thought I might?
Yeah, November seems to be a very positive sort of time to release a console.
The GameCube did come out in September.
I was going to say, the funny thing about Nintendo is, I almost think if someone was going to break the mold, yeah, it's going to be November. Because the thing about November is obviously that you're looking at Christmas. You're there ready. You're going to make sure there's stock. People are going to be able to buy it with plenty of time. You don't want to be dropping it in December, because it's going to be horrendous trying to get hold of them. You're going to sell out. You're not going to be able to meet demand, etc., etc., etc. October and November are golden. And November apparently, seems to be the one where it's at. I mean, maybe they mess around with September, October, depending on how they're feeling. Depending on, do you know, I wonder that the thing that might shift it for the Switch 2 is what first party games they've got ready to go. So, for example, like talk about Animal Crossing and how that shifted serious numbers of Switches. You've got to imagine, not to mention the pandemic, shifting a serious number of units for Nintendo as well. And so maybe if something else happens, they move that timetable. But yeah, they've got to be eyeing that sort of November slot.
Right? Is this your way of saying that if there is another global pandemic, that Nintendo will rush out the release of a new console?
Very possibly. It depends when.
If we get COVID-24.
Yeah, if we get COVID-24 in like March, then they'll be looking at like a June kind of release date. They'll bring it forward.
Honestly, if there was another global pandemic and there were more lockdowns, and we did have to spend a couple of months indoors, and Nintendo releasing a console in that time frame would be very welcome. That's all I'm going to say. So if Bill Gates, anyone from the Illuminati, anyone out there who kind of pulling the strings on any of this stuff, if you're listening, just try and make a couple of phone calls to Japan. Just get your shit aligned and try and make sure that they're ready when you are, because we will be. And what's a good segue for this? Trying to think. Jonesy, say I'm a massive fan of the Nintendo Switch.
Jamie, something you need to know about me: I'm a massive fan of the Nintendo Switch,
and I'm a massive fan of people who give us money And there are some lovely, lovely folks who do that. And the way they do it is by heading over to patreon.com/SuperShow, which is why our Patreon lives. And what they have done is they've gone over there and they have taken a look at the various rewards and perks that one can receive by supporting us, by pledging tiny fractions of your monthly income per month to reach different tiers. For example, you can get access to our Discord server if you head over there. You can get access to some Patreon exclusive content that we've recorded in the past. That's Patreon exclusive videos, Patreon exclusive podcasts. Keyword that I said a lot there, exclusive. The way you can get your access to any of that content that might sound appealing, while also supporting us and helping us keep recording this mega mammoth podcast in the process, is by heading over once again to patreon.com/SuperShow and showing us some love. Right now, there are some names on screen of some very, very fine folk who have already gone over there and done just that. So thank you all very much. But I'd also like to give a personal shout out, if I may, to Aaron Cameron, Athletic Gravy, Brimstone, Cole K, Ice Not Rock Salt, Jesper Camdal Nielsen, Leo Merger, Mindful Pig, Mr. Anthropic, Pastors Guild, and then of course we have the head honchos, the members of the board, Brett Z, aka Shellshock, Geometric Potter, Hacksaw Bookread, Manuel Guerrero, and of course Peaswad. Thank you all so much. We say it every week. We mean it every week. Everyone who's pledged from $1 a month to $1 million a month, whether you've pledged past, present, and or future, whether you pledge for 1 month to get access to exclusive content and then bugger off for eternity because you realize you didn't like us that much, we understand and we're grateful for your support. It is genuinely the reason we keep going. So thank you.
Imagine if Elon just popped along to give us $1 million for 1 month. Patreon, wouldn't that be nice?
What if he said in return that you have to rebrand the podcast permanently to the Xcast?
I'd do it. Of course, I'd do it. Like,
really?
Yeah, hell yeah, for £1 million. Like, if we got given £1 million, I'd make you make listicles again. I'd be like, Elon will do it.
Oh no, I'm never going back, Jonesy. Don't. Actually, for £1 million, maybe.
Yeah,
that'd
last a few years.
Well, Patreon takes a cut, then you and me have to split it in half, and then we get the moment where Chris texts us and says, "Hey guys, I heard about the £1 million
I'm
that
back.
you made on on that channel that I co-created with you guys and helped build with you guys." And we go, "Oh, this is awkward. If only we'd signed contracts." But then who needs paperwork, right, Elon? Speaking of Elon Musk, Jonesy, he likes going into space. I'm sure he's wondering what he'd find if he went out there. Do you think that he would find extraterrestrial life? Because I fucking don't.
Yes, he would, 100%. If he went far enough, he would find aliens. Somewhere you're not going to find aliens is on little planet Earth, knocking around in little sphere-shaped UFOs, or UAPs, as they're now known. Okay, this is a bit of a weird one. We're going to do a little bit of an aside, purely because it's been sort of in the news a decent amount this week, and we were talking about it before the show. And so I was like, yeah, we got to mention this. Just I find it fun, but it also annoyed me a little bit because I found the guys who were in, I think it was the congressional hearings about, the biologics and the UAPs in the past week. I found them to be some of the least convincing. Maybe they're grifters of some form. Like, I don't know what they're going to get out of it. They must be getting exposure and interviews and stuff and asked to do things. So maybe they're getting something out of it. Maybe they get a book deal. Maybe they'll make a documentary on the sci-fi or documentary channels or something. But yeah, I thought this was a fun week with a lot of alien talk.
I guess then I've got two questions though. One, and I suppose that we'll find out one way or another, and I suppose the fact that maybe we're talking about this kind of answers my own question, but is there still really that much clout in making up alien bullshit after all these years? And two, why did this feel different? Like, why was it happening in a congressional hearing? Why was OAC there and asking them like genuine, like well-meaning questions? And why did everyone on X, or Twitter as it was, I think probably at the time, go like, oh, cool, aliens exist?
I think the difference is, so the last couple of years, there's been a load of videos and things like Navy videos and that showing
Yeah.
apparent. I don't know why they've rebranded them. UFOs are good, like showing apparent alien technology, because UFO just means anything, and they are UFOs, unidentified flying objects, or they're UAPs, they're unidentified aerial phenomena. I think is UAP. Or
Underappreciated
I'm not sure.
pedophiles,
There you go.
of which there are none,
But I think a
right?
lot of the because of all that footage and because of all the weirdness, and then you had the thing with the Americans shooting down a weather balloon or something,
Oh, yeah.
not that long ago. That was maybe like Chinese, or maybe it's a Chinese surveillance satellite, or sorry, balloon or whatever. I think it's come back into the the forefront of people's minds, and it's like aliens, like UFOs. Um, and it's exciting because we all want. I think the world is so shit at the moment with homegrown bollocks, like the one political side don't like the other political side. You've got this whole like different people from different areas of the so-called culture war, like going after each other. You've then got war happening, like
Yep.
war in Europe for the first time in like a really long time. I think to maybe take your minds off of that and to think about UFOs, UAPs, little green men. Um, it's just maybe it's something, just something to distract you. It's like video games.
Well,
It's something to distract you from how crappy the world is at the moment.
I get that. But then I could also pose an alternative thought to you, which I saw a lot on social media, and as I hinted to you hinted at you before we started recording, that I kind of share, which is that the world is so shit, and we've got so much shit to deal with, often on personal and individual levels, that a lot of people I feel like saw all this stuff happening, watched some of these videos, and were just kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, okay, yeah, aliens exist. I've got work tomorrow, like.
Yeah, no, agreed. And I know this is. I think you've said that you hold sort of like similar opinions to that. I think it would change everything. I think it would change absolutely everything over the next however long. I think it would fundamentally change because anytime someone you try and have an argument. So I was big into like the going back a decent amount of time now, like the atheist movement online and all of that sort of stuff that gave rise to like the skeptic thing, which then like gave rise to a load of weirdness on the internet. If someone in that at that time, like if you could go back 15 years and you had this argument and it was aliens were real, the second someone said like my god or my religion, you just turn around and go aliens, man, shut up. Like
Mm.
what does your magic book say about aliens? And you'd be like a conversation over. The second like the films that come out about aliens and UFOs and all that, it would fundamentally change media in the same way that the idea of UFOs kind of changed when you got to, is it the 60s or the 70s that we started to have the sightings and the little green men and that became
Oh,
absolute
Roswell.
Roswell, yeah. That became massive. And
Yeah.
I think it was actually, I believe a lot of that was based off of Roswell and a couple of other very famous like UFO incidents, which gave rise to all the common myths that we have today. I think it would change everything. Not to mention technology. Like it would be the second you talk about like an interstellar species that can get here, because then the question is, well, what can we do with that level of power generation with this? Can we
Yeah.
trade with them? Are they part of like a United Federation of Planets? Can we
I just
go off world and work in a job where we work on a spaceship with funny little aliens knocking about? It'd be amazing.
I just think that like the chances that everything aligns in such a way that their technology or the technological advances they've made, even though some of them obviously have to lend themselves to interstellar travel and things like that, which we could make some use of. The idea that they'd like lend themselves, or at least we can, we could like reverse engineer them to the point where they lend themselves to our everyday lives. Again, it's like a weird hypothetical to me because like one of the things we were talking about before is that you talked about a very like something that you found quite easy to discredit, and it was someone who believed that they had, I think, communicated with extraterrestrials. Was that right? Or received like a
He said
written
he had a letter.
and
He
a
had a
letter,
letter.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
And like one of the things that's stupid about that is that because like you think about how minuscule the chance of extraterrestrial life feels like at times, and like the chances that they rock up and they can speak English feels like again it's like a 1 in a million within 1 in a million and so on and so forth. I always think that the same thing could be applied to like anything. Like you think about their appearance, it's very easy to say, oh well, they're probably not going to have 2 legs and 2 arms and a head because that's just the way that humans are, and they're not going to stand on 2 hind legs or whatever. Like, but what if they don't even have like physical form that we can comprehend because it doesn't exist on our planet. Or like, you know how you can't imagine a color or a sound that you haven't seen or heard
Right.
because it just doesn't exist. Like, what if we don't even have the capacity to envision what this alien looks like or how it communicates? To imagine that they can make video game consoles more powerful in 6 months when this extraterrestrial life form might exist in a gaseous form, and like what do we like? How do we know?
For me, it's not that side of it. It's like the fundamental principles in physics that I think would like blow us away. So interestingly, I think it was last week. There was also a South Korean company that said they'd made a room temperature and room pressure superconductor, and I saw a few X's. I don't know what you call them now. Posts on
Oh,
Twitter.
right. Zeets or
Is it Z? Oh God, whatever the hell it is.
I don't know.
Tweets. I saw tweets. I saw a couple of tweets about people saying, put aside the aliens, put aside all of that other shit that's going on in the world. If these South Koreans have actually managed to make a ambient temperature and room pressure superconductor, like the world is going to be completely different. And that is breaking sort of one barrier that we have at the moment, which is like superconductors that work without having to super cool them. And I think you crank that to 1,000,000 when you talk about off-world tech that aliens have used to get here, and I don't know. Yeah, it's a fanciful thing for me, and I'm excited for the day when the aliens arrive. But I think it's a long way off.
Yeah, he's like I love the sound of it, but like I'm still sitting here sometimes getting a tickle in the back of my throat and being reminded that we don't know how to cure the common cold, and I'm like
there you go.
All that like yeah, and it's like
meet aliens, 6 months, colds are gone.
Like I love that idea, and I know I can't use history as like to back up why I'm skeptical about this kind of things, because we've never been visited by extraterrestrial life forms in history, so we've got no frame of reference for what could happen should that be an eventuality. But it's just like humans are like we've done a lot of hard work, we've done a lot of grafting, Jonesy, and we've come a long way. But we've also got a long way to go. And I was joking to you earlier about like how when in the 50s and 60s they made like films about the cities of the future, and we had flying cars and we traveled via pneumatic tubes, and we had films scanned into our eyeballs, and we ate food that was just a paste that could taste of whatever you wanted to. And I'm sure in some weird way there are probably inventors out there who claim to have made technologies that are very similar to everything I've just described. They're just not adopted on a mass scale. There's also just like the chances are things are going to be pretty similar in 100 years from now as to what they are now. And I just don't know that a UFO rocking up is going to change that much. UFOs rocked up in Arrival and nothing happened. Everyone just shit themselves and started threatening to nuke them and stuff.
That was.
I think that's what we do.
I think Arrival was that you when you said about like a gaseous alien. I think that was what I was trying to think of. Is Arrival the one where they are like gaseous?
Well, they're kind of like it's kind of like there's like a weird glass wall with like a fog on the other side, but they do kind of like they project these symbols on top of them, and it's all about. But these Arrival is an interesting example, because the whole point of Arrival isn't just that. One of the reasons we have so much difficulty, or the characters have so much difficulty interpreting and understanding these the aliens in Arrival, is because the twist of Arrival is they're like weird interdimensional beings that time travel, right?
Yes.
And that they're communicating through the future and the past and weird shit like that. And that's like that. And so that what is it that they've come to give us a warning about something that's going to happen in the future, and like all that kind of weird stuff.
Yeah, no,
so like, even those elements like all change the nature of like what a potential alien race or alien species or alien civilization could be, and how difficult it could be for us to communicate with them, understand them, interface with them, leverage their technology, anything. Just because they can get here, like it doesn't mean that we're going to have 100 times faster microwaves on store shelves.
Do you know what it might be? It could well be as well that even if it all turned out to be true, they might turn around and go, "We're not giving you any technology or anything because you're not ready for it." And they might go, and they might say like, "You're so far behind us, like shut up." And then they might just pop around every now and then just to kind of like we're a zoo, and they're looking through the glass, and we see them arrive in the sky, and then they just piss off, and then we get nothing out of it. We don't even see the aliens. One thing that kind of bugs me in general, so I love sci-fi. I'm really into like soft sci-fi, not like anything too sort of hard. But I always get frustrated by sci-fi where it's like the aliens have come to suck up all of our water or to take all of our like whatever resource, and it's like if they've got the ability to travel thousands of light years, they're not rocking up to a crappy little rocky world with barely any resources like ours when they've passed clouds of hydrogen which are infinitely larger than like any of our oceans and blah 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 and all this sort of bollocks of, oh no, they want to extract the oxygen from the water, and it's like, no they don't. There are just, it's out there to gather ad infinitum in the universe. They don't give a shit about our resources. It's also, or similarly, like they want to enslave humans. Like, why? We're rubbish. They would probably have a technology 1 billion times better than anything they could use for us.
We're the least efficient slaves in the world.
We would be so crap, wouldn't we?
We need so many tea breaks, so many lunch breaks.
Do you know what would be more likely is that it's more like they rock up and it's like an intergalactic like gambling federation who are like, hey guy, or like a car salesman, but like spaceship salesman who's like, oh, here's some idiots on this little planet who don't know what they've got, and like, we're gonna sell you this amazing spaceship, and all you have to do is give us all of your gold. And then we're like, yeah, we'll do it. And it turns out they gave us this shitty old jalopy that's worth nothing, and we just gave them like every ounce of gold on the entire planet. And they're like, cheers, idiots.
Then, like, I feel like a race or a civilization that advanced could find Earth and be like, oh, we're just going to crunch that entire planet in this giant machine and extract all the gold from it.
Is that Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy where they're like, we're building a galactic highway and Earth's in the way, and then they just vaporize it?
Oh, right. Like L.A. Noire.
Right. They just go like, oh yeah, no, sorry guys. And they're like, you had like years to raise an issue with this if you'd have gone to the intergalactic planning office. And we're like, we don't know that as a thing. And they just snap their fingers and Earth disappears. Yeah. Oh well. Anyway, sorry, not to digress too far from games and other stuff, but it seemed like a fun week. And I will mention as well, someone did say in the comments, it's interesting how there's a bunch of other shit going on in the world at the moment that might be nice to distract from if you're certain governments say like, no, do the alien thing now. Joe Biden what's the thing? Is Joe Biden really crooked? Is like Donald Trump doing weird shit? Is Putin doing this? Has Rishi Sunak just like fucked everyone? And then they go like, do the aliens. We need to distract them from the real news. It's probably one of them.
They are presented like with a catalogue of which distraction do you want to unleash on the world this time?
Exactly.
Oh, I think it's high time for another global recession.
Yes. Yeah.
A fine choice, sir. A fine choice. What else have you been up to, Jonesy, though, other than pining about aliens?
I've not had much time to game, but I will quickly mention a film that I watched that recently came onto Sky, which was Vengeance, which is from BJ Novak, who stars and wrote it as well. I'm not sure if he directed it too, but if anyone's watched The American Office, I believe he plays Ryan in The American Office. It is an interesting film because it's based around, it's very current. So he is a like New York creative, like Manhattan creative, and he's trying to come up with an idea for a podcast. And he has a friend of his who's like, got a company and is one of the most successful podcasts in the world. And it felt quite close to home because obviously we've been doing a weekly podcast for 3 years. Yeah. But obviously this is on a different scale, and it's he wants to do a true crime podcast, and he is invited to go to a funeral of a girl that he hooked up with a few times, and ends up going just through social discomfort. Like he couldn't say no. Ends up turning up, and it's like a comic thriller, if you will, like mystery thriller, where he's sort of like doing this podcast but trying to figure out what happened to her. But there's some humor, and it's a good time, and I enjoyed it. And it's actually, for a lot of films, I feel like they aren't these days. I'm not saying none are. Like there are some good films out there. Oppenheimer and Barbie are out at the moment, which are doing very well. But I enjoyed it. I thought the writing was good. I thought the directing was good. I thought it had some small town like charm to it, and it was, it was enjoyable, and I'd definitely recommend it. It had one of my favorite lines in a film that I've seen for a long time. Which was this guy, I can't remember his name in the film. he's in this small Texan town, and he says to this girl, he says, "Oh, can I make you a drink?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, thanks." And he says, "Oh, how'd you take your coffee?" And she's like, "In the mouth." And then I thought that was hilarious. I've never heard that response to that before.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I thought when as soon as you said that, I was trying to predict it, and my guess was going to be like in a cup or in a mug, but in my mouth is much better. It's funnier.
It is funny, and it kind of then lends all the alternatives, because then you think, how else could you take your coffee? Yeah, no, and it was fun. It was good.
Good man. No, I like it. You mentioned Oppenheimer. I will just give a quick shout out to that because I did make it out to the cinema this past weekend to see Christopher Nolan's latest cinematic rip roarer, and I had a damn good time, Jonesy. I know you're a big Oppenheimer fan yourself. It's something that you're keen to go out and see. So
very much so.
Yeah, maybe we'll save some in-depth discussion for another time until perhaps you've been able to see it, or until such a time where we just feel like the one thing the Super Show podcast is lacking is a discussion about the morals or ethics of nuclear warfare. But yeah, and it would be a surprise to absolutely no one that Christopher Nolan continues to be. I was about to say he's on make a comment about him being on the warpath, but that doesn't seem particularly appropriate. He continues to tackle completely, slightly less original this time. Obviously, real human, real story based on a real novel. I think. What's the novel it's based on called? The one that
I don't know.
Something about Icarus, Flight of Icarus, or something like that.
Right. Okay. Very apt.
So like not original in the same way that like Tenet and Inception and Interstellar were, but still, he's taking on 9-figure budgets and making something that feels still wholly unique and true to a very clear and very concise vision. And I think the other thing I wanted to say about it for anyone who's maybe on the fence, because there aren't as many sort of like action-oriented hooks as there might have been in like the Batman trilogy or any of the sci-fi films I just mentioned. Like he somehow manages to take like what might have been an action set piece in Tenet and swap it out for like courtroom drama at times in Oppenheimer, and it's still somehow just as sort of tense and riveting and like really quite electric at times. Really well made film, full of wonderful performances, and also just a really kind of interesting. I don't know, an interesting look at obviously a very pivotal and important point in human history that I by the sounds of things, didn't know as much as perhaps you know about, Jonesy, other than what he made and what they did with them and where they dropped them. The kind of the surface level bullet points. We'll say though, a lot of names, so get ready to remember names and faces.
Right. I do think it's I'm kind of falling in love with it. I don't know if it's a specific genre, but the dramatized historical scientific movie is something that I've seen a few of in the last sort of number of years and have really enjoyed. A lot of them. Like from what was the guy's name? I can't remember the guy from the Newt Scamander actor from Magical Beasts. Magical Beasts and Where to Find Them. What the hell is that guy's name?
You're thinking of Eddie Redmayne in The Theory of Everything.
So yeah, Eddie Redmayne when he was playing Stephen Hawking. Like I love that film.
The Theory of Everything. Yeah.
Yes, and I can't remember the name, but the one with the number crunchers at NASA. The women who were crunching all the numbers out the back of like when they were doing the moon landings.
Hidden Figures.
Like again, I love those kind of films. I know that
the Imitation Game.
Imitation Game. All of those things. Like it's such a good way to take something that happened historically, and absolutely, like sure, they're not going to get it perfectly right, and they're going to add a lot of stuff for impact and drama and like change some characters. But I think as long as they hit the main historical points, I think it's a really good way to impart like information and to give educate people on history of big events that happen, which I think is really cool. So yeah, no, super excited for Oppenheimer. Looking forward to seeing
it. Definitely recommend it. Barbie next, hopefully. Stay tuned for that. I do legitimately want to see it.
Yeah, me too. I was kind of like, I just thought it was going to be crap. I thought it was going to be some like kids film about Barbie, and I was like, why would you want to see this? But apparently
were you keeping up with the trailers and stuff?
I think I watched like 2 of them, and I thought it was maybe a kids film with some adult oriented comedy in it. But from what I understand, it's not that. It's a lot more to it. But then
seems a bit, yeah.
But then to be fair, I've then kind of seen some stuff that goes the other way and says no, it is for kids, but it's trying to have a broader message, and so I'm kind of torn about how I'm going to feel about it. Because if it is like a kids film with a broader message, it might not be as good as I'm hoping it is. Because I don't know. We'll have to see it and compare notes.
Yes, if you could see it with me, I'd much appreciate that because I don't really know who else to take at this point, and I don't, Barbie's one of those films that you're not going to go to on your own as a 30-year-old man. Like, I just don't want the looks. It was the same thing when the fucking Mario movie came out. Like, I couldn't bring myself to go alone to the cinema for that.
Well, yeah, it's super easy for me. I just take a kid with me. I'm like, come on, we're going to the cinema, and then and then I can go and see whatever kids film I want.
Yeah. And then Oppenheimer, I think you're allowed to go and see on your own. In fact, I'm guessing, would anyone in your family join you for Oppenheimer, or is that a solo venture?
No, they would if I asked them. However, I kind of think maybe solo in the IMAX is the way that I would probably choose to go and see
Yeah.
it.
One of the weird, I just reminded myself. So I have some much younger half brothers. What I say, much younger at this point, at this interval, they are 16. The brothers are 16 and 14, and the younger of the two, who's 14 now, but he was younger at the time of the story I'm about to tell, is like really into science stuff and like reads about like fucking black holes and shit like that. He's a very bright kid. Those two are much brighter than I ever was. And when we went to the cinema to see another film, kind of in the vein of what you're talking about, like biopics based on figures from technically the scientific community, First Man, the Armstrong, but he must have been. I mean, he's 14 now, and he must have been 11 when that came out, younger, 10, and like he came, and the older one didn't.
Oh, that's so
Like,
funny. Like this way that they're into like the different stuff, and he was obviously
yeah,
already into that. Yeah, that's cool, man. It's wicked.
yeah, and he had a good time. Kids, eh?
Indeed.
With their brains. One thing I also wanted to give a shout out to, Josie. It's been a good week for media, because this is another going to be another pretty glowing report. I've been playing a fair amount of Remnant 2
Okay.
in the past week. Played about 15 hours or so. I think you am I right in thinking there was a little bit of surprise on your face as I said that?
I knew you were going to play it. I knew you were planning to. Obviously, we played Remnant 1 back in the day with Steph Murphy, didn't we? We had a little
Yeah.
think about, and I know you said you were interested. I thought you might fall off it faster than you have. I think you've played more of it than I thought you would.
To be honest, I agree. I have already also played more of it than I thought I would as well. Because you're right to mention the first one. Like it was one of those. I've already played more than twice as much Remnant 2 as I ever played Remnant from the Ashes. I thought the fundamentals of Remnant were fine and super sufficient for some fun co-op sessions like the ones we had back in the day. Like solid third-person shooting fundamentals, like engaging enough, like procedural world design. Some occasionally very frustrating but ultimately doable boss battles. And it's funny, a lot of those sort of key pillars are very much present in Remnant 2, but they've cut out a lot of the middlemen, and I feel like the kind of the meat on the bone in Remnant 2 is a lot tastier and a lot juicier.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, it's one of those things where I just feel like again, like the fundamentals, the kind of the core principles that drive Remnant 2 in terms of that third person shooting, the procedural level design, the boss battles, the kind of the not quite loot system, but still kind of a loot system. That's something more akin to like a Dark Souls or a From Software kind of title where it's like there is kind of like loot and there is a reward system, but it's still like it's named items that drop in specific circumstances. It's all really rewarding in a way that has kind of caught me off guard. And one thing I think is really, really cool is just how far they've taken the procedural generation elements this time round, where now, you know, when you start the game for the first time, obviously everyone kind of loads into the same sort of hub zone at the start of the story. But when you first go out kind of into the game's multiple worlds and multiple biomes, it's not just that you get a random one of those. You get a random one, and then the storyline you get within that is random. And when I say storyline, I mean like different cutscenes, different like story and lore drops, different world bosses. Then each dungeon that you go to off of that world is in itself procedurally generated with different events. And so so I've already played some co-op with Steph because he picked this up as well, and I know it's going down well with the Techno Ovo boys. we had a moment where I had played about, I think when we met, like when we first started playing, I'd played about 6 hours and he'd played about 25. And I had a weapon that I had got, that I'd crafted using a drop from a boss that he had never seen, and there was no
Right.
guarantee he ever would see. And like
Which is
that's really fascinating to me.
It is. It actually, ironic. I won't go back into it. Is of why we were talking about it, but also makes me think of what we were talking about a little earlier, which is if AI game generation really does go as far down the route as it could, you could well end up people playing effectively completely different games. And it's interesting to know that with Remnant 2, you and Steph have basically found that because of the way that
Yeah,
game functions, is that you're almost playing two different games. So yeah, but that's super interesting.
yeah. And like for anyone that like worries that that might mean they miss out on stuff, there are hooks in there for you to. There's a thing called adventure mode, which is where you can take the locations that appear in your campaign and re-roll them and essentially re-randomize them and run them again separately, but with all your character progress carrying over. So if it's like, oh, I ran through that entire area and this location or this event didn't spawn for me on my run, so I didn't get this item and I needed that item to put in there, then you can kind of like re-roll certain elements or even re-roll your whole campaign if you don't care about your campaign progress, and like keep. And like it just seems like there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of secrets, a lot of puzzles. It feels like all the exploration, and every time I dig a little bit beneath the surface, I feel really rewarded for my time. And all of this is happening in the context of a even more solid third person shooter, where it feels like the kind of the skill system and the mod system and the upgrade systems, that everything's very there's a rewarding is a word that I keep coming back to. Like the feedback loop and everything you're doing in this game, combined with the fact that there is this sort of like procedurally generated element that makes everything even more kind of like uncertain, and like that sense of discovery that people often describe with From Software games, that I don't get to experience too often because of how little I play them. I'm kind of getting a lot of that from this, and that's been really cool. Like this is the most time I've spent on a video games wiki since I played Elden Ring.
Right.
Trying to toe the line between um, finding out more information about what I can be doing or what I could be crafting or what I get for this boss or how to make that weapon. But at the same time trying to avoid spoilers where like there's one example like I'd love to give you. Like I don't know if people would consider it a spoiler as to how I ended up with one weapon, and like because it's such a like long daisy chain of events like that started as a fetch quest, and it involved like communicating with this one NPC, then it involved using a key item in one area to get a melee weapon, then it involved using a melee weapon in, I won't describe the specifics, but using a melee weapon in a way that no one would ever in a million years experiment with using a melee weapon, which
Right.
then got me access to a consumable, then using that consumable teleported me to a place that is this one-off area that you never go to for any other reason, and if you explore that area enough, then you find another uh, item in there that can be used to craft this. Like, it's layers upon layers upon layers that it's kind of convoluted at times, but also is really rewarding when you figure it out for yourself, and also really engaging when you find something that you don't know what to do with because all you want to do is figure out what to do with it.
It's that sort of
Yeah,
thing as well. I mean, it just sounds like, and we've talked about this before with certain games, is people that you can tell have a joy of making video games, and then they do it because they want to do it, and they know that people will get that find it that rewarding, so they're happy to go that deep with stuff, and they're
yeah,
happy to build in layers of games rather than the bog standard, oh, kill boss, find crate, get thing. When
totally.
people actually put time, effort, love, and everything into it, and then and that's, I think, is one of the best feelings you can get from a game. So no, glad you've been
Yeah.
enjoying it.
Yeah, totally. Recommend it. I also think that no matter where you get it, because it's on PC and consoles. I think maybe just next gen consoles at the moment or current gen consoles. But I want to say it's not even a full price title. I think the baseline version of the game cost about £40 here in the UK, depending on where you get it. Um, again, I don't know if that's a selling point for people. I know it's a little bit of a dry patch for games at the moment. So I feel like if you're looking for something to play, check out a couple of reviews, and if it seems like your thing, then it gets a seal of approval from me. Um, Really nice, Jonesy, to come onto the podcast and just be able to talk about a new video game that I've played in a timely fashion and like.
Just had a good time with you.
Yeah, like I don't know why it just feels like that hasn't happened without an asterisk or a caveat, like for a little while. I don't know why that is. There's been so many great games this year. I don't know why Remnant 2 is the one that's made me like, oh yeah, I there's no asterisk here.
Yeah, it's been a strange year for games. I think we've talked about this before. Some good games have come out, but other times it's felt like barely anything's happened. So no, that's good to hear.
Yeah, Chris literally just texted me. I haven't actually. It's just reminded me I haven't replied to him. But Chris literally texted me yesterday, just saying Diablo 4 is a bit shit, isn't it? And I kind of I read that message, and I thought, yeah,
Which is
yeah.
hilarious because you guys, when Diablo 4 came out, it was like, oh, Diablo 4 so much better than Diablo 3
Okay,
and
it's not
Diablo
actually, I will
Eternal
say
or whatever.
it's not actually shit, but in like the context in which Chris is messaging it and means it, like in a ha ha very funny sense, it is a bit shit.
Right.
Like, as in, everyone I know fell off that game before season 1 even started, which is just
I'm
rough.
glad I didn't give it another try after
But,
after
there-
3.
mark my words, Jonesy, there will be a time in the future when Diablo 4 is either cheap enough or free enough that you will, and probably the latter, maybe even Game Pass one day, depending on how quickly Microsoft and Activision and Blizzard get things moving, where you will play it and you will see that there is like 50, 60 hours of really solid like loot based action RPG gameplay to be had with an average story and slightly plodding traversal, but still mostly engaging gameplay. And you'll be glad you didn't pay
I'm,
£60 for it, but you'll be like, okay.
I'm looking forward to it.
I don't know if you wanted. Yeah. Well, I guess at least some games, if Remnant proves anything, are trying this. Ironic because it's a sequel and it shares a lot of DNA from the original one, but it feels like they're trying something new. It feels like they're trying something different. And like you said, it's a labor of love, Jonesy, right? Which you get a lot nowadays when it comes to slightly more independent productions. I feel like that's something you find less and less when you get up to the truly homogenized AAA or even quadruple A machines that some publishers have turned into that nowadays. And one publisher that is regularly accused of being such is Ubisoft. And I'll be honest, Jonesy, if some rumors and some stories that have broken this past week are anything to go by, they're not doing anything to change that reputation anytime soon. Because Ubisoft have allegedly cancelled their Immortals Fenyx Rising sequel. And considering that was, it felt at the time like one of the better received and kind of like more well liked attempts at even a game that fit very much within that Ubisoft formula. People enjoyed that game was doing something different. It had some original ideas, original presentation, and overall it was a fun package. We were talking just last year about how Ubisoft apparently intended to grow that into a franchise and explore different mythologies. A sort of a Hawaiian Polynesian based game was discussed, but supposedly company leadership has ultimately decided to cancel it due to, quote, perceived challenges around establishing the IP. Which, again, to go back to how I tried to segue, Jonesy, when you're trying to shake off your reputation as like a fucking, like a not a slaughterhouse, but like a grindhouse, you know, a just a churn and burn, let's make guaranteed hits, familiar franchises, established fan bases. Like when a game like Immortals Fenyx Rising gets one shot and then it's in the can, is that a bad look?
Do you know, it is, and I think it is, but partly because of what my own perception of Fenyx Rising was. Because when it came out, it was really, we've said about Ubisoft loads of times recently that they just don't seem to push anything. Like they just seem to put games out and not mention it. Fenyx Rising, I think, was the total opposite. They pushed that game hard as anything. I seem to remember it was everywhere. It was like the game that was launching Stadia. It was, you could. It was always advertised on like cross platforms, and it was massive. Everyone was talking about how much they loved it. It felt like it was a big thing. I got it from my wife. I believe it was like for the Christmas.
Mm.
I played, a couple of hours of it and thought, oh yeah, this is a cool game. Like I'd quite like to play more of this. And I never went back to it. Never played any more. I think she did the same thing. She played a couple of hours, never went back to it.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it was a game that was almost like lie and they will come. Like build it, say it's this massive thing, say that everyone's really into it, say that it's like doing wonderful things, a great new blah blah, and then people will just think it is and they'll play it, and then maybe they didn't.
No, but well, did people play it? I think yes. One thing I potentially read was that too many people played it once it became either A, heavily discounted, or B, in some cases free.
Right.
But I believe the goodwill around that game and the kind of the fan support that it did have in some corners, that was real. I still remember your friend and mine, Skill Up. This was, of course, in the kind of the Christmas period, the winter window, where Ubisoft pulled the batshit crazy move of releasing Immortals: Fenyx Rising, Watch Dogs: Legion, and Assassin's Creed Valhalla within 3 months of each other. I think it was
Yes.
literally like bang, September, October, November, a third-person open world action adventure game for every month. And people out there, the people like Skill Up were out there saying like, "Hey, Immortals: Fenyx Rising is the best of these three games, and it's not even close." And I think he was right.
But this is, I remember all of that, and I remember like thinking how big it was. It seemed that it was, but then to be like, oh, well, we're not going to make a sequel to it. It kind of doesn't really. I don't really understand that. Like, if it got reviewed that well, people played it that much. I don't. Yeah, it just find this confusing, which is why it makes me wonder if it was a little bit overhyped and
Right.
didn't deliver maybe in uh, what they were hoping. But I don't know. I've got no numbers to like know one or the other. I'd be really interested to see like numbers wise how that did, because like I said, it seemed to be everywhere. It seemed to be
Yeah.
pushed really hard.
Or, or like a situation where that goodwill just didn't translate to dollars and cents, and like
Maybe.
I just saw a tweet, or yeah, I'm just gonna keep calling them tweets. Fuck it. Prior to coming onto the podcast about how um, that Dungeons and Dragons film from a couple of months ago,
Right.
like might get a sequel, but if it does, it will have to be on a heavily reduced budget because of how much money the first film made. And the context in which I saw this tweet was it being quote tweeted by someone else who's clearly a really big fan, who was like, "Oh, this bums me out so much. This film was so much better than it had any right to be." And that was the total vibe of that film. Was like the reviews were actually okay. The trailers didn't do it justice. This is way better than it had any right to be. Also, no one watched it. And so it's like there's a weird disconnect there. Or it happened with Alita Battle Angel as well. There were people on the internet who will convince you Alita Battle Angel is like the best action film of the last 15 years. It's like, but you didn't go to the cinema for it, did you, buddy? And it's like, well,
Do you know what's
yeah.
funny? I went to the cinema for both those films.
There you go.
Enjoyed both of them. Thought they were both
You are not part of the problem, James. You're one of
thought
the good guys.
thought they were both very good films, and think that both deserve a sequel. Was very surprised that I was one of the people that tried to find why, like when the Lita Batter Angel, is it Lita? I can never remember. Is it Lita or Alita?
Alita, I
Alita.
think. With an A at the front. I'll
Yeah,
double check.
I was surprised that that film didn't get a sequel. I was like, when is the sequel coming out? Like, what is the source material? Because I sort of really enjoyed it. I think it was a graphic novel or something, right? And yeah, Dungeons and Dragons again it was an enjoyable film. Was a lot of fun. Wasn't what I was expecting. Was a lot better than I thought it was going to be. But again, I think the problem with a lot of these films is they put an absolutely astronomical budget behind them, and then they have to make so much money to be viable that you can have a film that made like $500 million at the box office, and they're like, it was a commercial flop, so we're not going to make another one. Games seem a little bit more different, because games seem like they don't seem as, especially for the marketing budget, like the movie thing is, if a film costs $250 million to make, you've got to assume there's $250 million behind it in marketing. Video games don't have that. Ubisoft games definitely don't have that. Maybe Fenyx Rising I'm wrong about, but I don't know. It seemed like it was everywhere. It seemed really well received. It seemed very positive. And yeah, I'm really surprised that there's not going to be a sequel to this. It's actually a game that if you said to me now, would you like to go and play some more of? I'm like, yeah, there's got to be more to that I haven't experienced that would be cool. Like it was a fun game. It looked good. It played well, but maybe it didn't have longevity. I could imagine that from the small amount I did play. Maybe the longevity wasn't there. The other thing, of course, I think in these days it was a single player game, right? So it wasn't like an online multiplayer. And I think if you're not a GTA 5, if you're not a like a League of Legends or a Dota or something like that, I think maybe companies just aren't as interested because the legs aren't there to
Yeah,
keep the money machine churning.
I mean, that's a fair point. It's something that Ubisoft have probably become more conscious of over time. Especially as with their other forays into the free-to-play market that you mentioned. A lot of the other games they tend to just kind of like drop out of nowhere. Certainly, there's been an increased focus and awareness of online markets, or at least games with live service potential. Because for as much as, for example, Assassin's Creed Valhalla wasn't an online multiplayer game by any stretch, that had major games as a service hooks, released a lot of DLC. Immortals Fenyx Rising also released DLC, but I wonder if they have metrics about like how many people went back for those DLC packages. When the people did go back, did they spend more money on armor sets or horses? And they were like maybe looking at the numbers and saying, even if we tried to like create a ratio of Assassin's Creed players to Immortals players are spending less money and seem less engaged in that ecosystem, and that we feel like we're struggling to establish a brand. And I mean, there's been a lot of talk, and we're going to talk about this a bit more in a second, but a lot of talk about Ubisoft pivoting into their more well-known brands going forward, because I guess there's less risk in that, financially speaking. And maybe that's what they just had to kind of like make a kind of a cruel decision of like, hey, there's a couple of hundred people here who could either take another risk on this franchise or make a safer bet come out faster or in a better state. And someone running the numbers, Darren from accounts, was like, well, you know which one I think is the safer bet.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and Assassin's Creed has got such pedigree. I think it's a lot easier for a good franchise to have a bad game. Not saying Valhalla was bad, but it's a lot easier for them to have a bad game and still do well. Whereas a brand new IP is going to have a lot harder time. There is some fun in the chat with regard to the movies we were just talking about. So I'm just going
Oh yeah.
just to say D&D. It wasn't the first movie; it was the fourth because there are three others which I've never heard of. So
Wait,
we're
when
learning
they
about this.
say other D&D movies, I hate to have a conversation in real time with someone in the chat, especially when I can't even sit in front of me. But they including that one from like the early 2000s with the guy I can't the guy from like is it one of the Wayans brothers? Was he in it? And
Oh yeah. I think I know what you're talking. Oh, okay. I don't know.
and Jeremy Irons.
I
Like,
think
is that one of the Dungeons and Dragons films that we're counting?
I
Because if we are, then
I
I don't know
really
if they
hope
should
so.
count.
Also, or a little bit of a conspiracy theory here. So, no sequel to Alita Battle Angel because Disney bought Fox, and Disney didn't like Alita doing well because it was doing better than Captain Marvel, and so they killed off the potential of a sequel to Alita because of Captain Marvel. Um,
Wow.
there you go.
I mean, that is there's a bit of a tinfoil hat going on there, but you know what? It's all valid. Thank you for sharing.
I see. I've always thought there's nothing in Captain Marvel, but it's the Superman problem. Superman movies are crap because Superman is so OP, and Captain Marvel's got the same problem. She is so OP that you cannot have a good film of Captain Marvel in unless the opening act of the film is how she's lost her power. Same as Superman, you can only
Oh,
have a good Superman film where the opening act is him losing his power, and then I'm bored. I'm immediately bored.
yeah, I've got to be honest. I watched a trailer the other day for The Marvels, which is the one that brings I've just forgotten her name.
uh, Ms. Marvel and Captain Marvel and someone else together, right?
Yeah, I don't know who the third person is.
No, me either.
But that's got some interesting gimmick, I think, in it where whenever they use their powers, they switch places, and so they're kind of like pinging around.
Oh, what?
I don't know, and they use Beastie Boys in the trailer, which I was like, this is a bummer because this is the Beastie Boys are making me happy, but the film's slightly less so. But also, I will say that I'm not one of those like the quartering I hate Brie Larson guys. I've never even seen Captain Marvel, and I think Brie Larson's a very good actor. I think Room is a phenomenal film.
I thought, yeah, I think Brie Larson's fine. Like, as the what's I can't remember her name as Captain Marvel character. I think Brie Larson's absolutely fine. No issue with it. Like I said, it's just I can't get on. I always struggle to get on board with those overpowered hero supers because I just think they
Yeah.
get unless you do something kind of like fun and different with them, like what was the Thor and Hulk one where they're fighting on the planet, like
That was Ragnarok.
Ragnarok, yeah. So something like that, I think, is can work, and you sort of use humor when you got two insanely powerful
Hmm.
superheroes. You can do different stuff with them, but yeah, no, Captain Marvel was a bit nothing for me anyway. But no, Ms. Marvel, the series, I actually thought was all right. I did not like what they did with her powers to make her like weird glassy power. Like she doesn't just grow; she has these weird, um, strange, almost holographic powers, which were kind
Oh,
of weird, and I wasn't that into it.
yeah, I don't know how I feel about that.
But did you hear this? That apparently Dune 2 is getting 5 to 6 weeks of unfettered IMAX access, and so the Marvel's films are not going to be released in IMAX apparently because it's all coming out at the same time. I don't know what truth there is to that, but apparently so.
I don't
So
know.
apparently, if you want to see those Marvel's films in IMAX, you won't be able to because Dune 2 has stolen the thunder. So there
I'll
you
be
go.
honest. I don't know what the current slate for Marvel stuff is looking like, but I would far rather see June 2 in IMAX than
Me too.
anything I
Yeah.
can remember Marvel are making. I don't know. I had one of those moments. Not to go on a whole Marvel tangent. I apologize, but I had one of those moments the other day where I think I must have read something online or seen something on social media. I was trying to picture what the next Avengers looks like who the leaders, who are the next Avengers, like what does that room
Right.
look like when they all gather up? And I was like, really, like even simple things like imagining the Falcon now being Captain America, and like imagining Shang-Chi being there and stuff like that. I'm like it doesn't. There's something about it that just doesn't fit in my it doesn't compute yet. Maybe it's just because I haven't seen it, but
No,
I
no,
don't
I'm
know.
I'm with you. I don't like it. Like, and the reason is I realized this the other day, and I watched a documentary about Stan Lee, and I think it completely nailed for me what I like about the previous roster of Avengers, and it was nothing to do with the superhero stuff. It was all of the realistic character development behind the scenes, and then the superhero stuff is like a dusting on top, which makes it cool. So they have real problems and real issues, and you get, like Stanley said, with a lot of his characters, the reason they become the problems they had were real human problems, and they were superheroes. Whereas I think when you introduce a whole new cast of characters, you need to rebuild all of that, and I don't think they've done it with any of that Shang-Chi or any of the like Falcon or anything. I haven't seen the series, to be fair, with Falcon, but I just don't think they've done it.
Yeah, that's the problem. But I think you touched on another problem for me. Like not being like a TV guy means I'm out of the loop on a lot of stuff. I'm out of the loop on, the Hawkeye kind of stuff. That was
Oh,
a
me
TV
too.
show,
Yeah,
right? I'm out of the loop on. I know Loki's coming back.
I've not
Um,
any of that TV stuff. I've not watched.
yeah.
I'm trying to
Plus,
watch Secret Invasion, but even
oh
that,
yeah,
I fell off quite hard.
the,
Um,
the 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 final episode and kind of the resolution of Secret Invasion was heavily spoiled for me on social media, and I saw that and I was like, not only this is a pretty rough double whammy, brace yourself. Not only am I glad I didn't watch Secret Invasion, but I'm also glad I'm no longer invested in the MCU as a concept.
right.
And like, because the also like the films, I think undeniably have been getting worse. Like when you look at that last Ant-Man, when you look at the Eternals, were they called?
Oh, that was
Um,
awful. The Eternals. Yeah.
there are a few others in there. I know we don't see eye to eye on this, but I really was not a big fan of. I was really disappointed, in fact, by Thor: Love and Thunder. I thought
Right.
Guardian. I thought Guardians 3 was solid. I actually had a
Yes.
good time with Guardians 3. So there's still life in there, but they've got an interesting path ahead. Um,
Wow. We
but
diverted somehow. I don't even know how we got onto it, but there we
I
go.
don't know. But unsurprisingly, Jonesy, if you ask anyone at Ubisoft, they will convince you that there is still very much life in Assassin's Creed. And in fact, some people have even suggested that future plans for Immortals were cast into doubt because of the company deciding to pivot towards its most prominent brands, of which AC is most definitely one. Although, one thing that might help you, me, and maybe even others around the world get a little bit more excited about at least the near future of Assassin's Creed is the news that Assassin's Creed Mirage, which is the upcoming Assassin's Creed title, might be significantly shorter than what we've gotten used to in previous entries, with especially Valhalla and Odyssey. Um,
Thank God.
yes, in fact, Ubisoft lead producer Fabian Salamon has confirmed that during internal playtesting, it took most players around 20 hours to complete Mirage if they rushed, and quote 25 to 30 hours for completionists. Those numbers sound a bit weird to me, like the idea that a completionist run is 25 hours and a rushed playthrough is 20 hours. What's a normal speed playthrough then, Fabian? Tell us.
Yeah, they're all pretty close together.
Yeah, those numbers seem a little bit too bunched up. I don't know if Fabian knows what the word completionist means to some people online who will find a way to play this for 7,000 hours and then leave it a negative review on Steam because that's the way some people's brains work. But I think, Jonesy, we can largely agree, considering how long to beat suggests that Assassin's Creed Valhalla took around 60 hours just for the main story, 96 if you included side quests, and 143 if you wanted to do everything. This is good news. This is a breath of fresh air.
Well, I think I can completely appreciate why with a game like Assassin's Creed you want to get as much as possible out of such like an amazing full and lush world, and you really want to like use that and then make sure people enjoy that to its fullest. But when you're talking about like 120 hours to do everything, and I played that game a lot. Like I put a lot of hours into that and was nowhere near finishing everything. And I'm someone who cannot stick to the main story. I'm trying to do, I'm trying to go over, I'm trying to do everything, but I do not want to be playing it for 120 hours. I think I'm probably lucky if I hit 25 to 30 hours in Valhalla. And I felt like I had spent a long time with that game. So the idea that I can actually play Mirage, play it for 25 to 30 hours and finish the game and do all I'm totally there for that. I think that's something that I'm looking forward to in an Assassin's Creed game. It's been something which it's felt like it's been a long time coming. So
yeah, it has. And I think that's why it seems crazy to say out loud. Like I know that a lot of people have been asking for this, and this has been a talking point for a long time around not just Assassin's Creed, but other very expansive RPGs and open world titles out there in the industry at the moment. But yeah, the fact that a relatively short or like shorter time to complete a main story or even to see everything a game has to offer is a selling point that says a lot about the relationship certain gamers have with games at the moment. But I say certain gamers because, don't get me wrong, there is still very much a crowd of people who, if you gave them 1,000 hours of content, they will pay you back with 1,000 hours of playing. But also says a lot about, how franchises had sort of lost their way and lost a lot of their charm and spread themselves a bit too thin. And Assassin's Creed had definitely become one of them. Like, when you're getting to the point where an average gamer, which is what I think you're a solid example of, can't roll credits and see a story like Valhalla through because of just how spread thin it is and how much content there is to see, you've got a problem, right? Like, that should always be the goal when you're telling a story. Make sure people get to the end of it.
Absolutely, the reality is like I would describe myself as like average gamer, I think, and I just don't have the time to put. So my problem is always this: I don't have the time to play the games enough in a short space of time to finish them, which means that then other games are coming out that I also want to play. So then means toward the sort of the middle portion of the game, that middle third, where my time was already spread relatively thinly, I'm then torn in multiple directions, which means I'm playing even less, which then means my investment into the game is less, which means to get through that middle third, it just takes forever. And so if you're sort of like 15 hours into a game and you've just finished, what feels like the opening section, and you're thinking, I've got another 45 hours to sit through this, and I've been playing it for a month already. I'm definitely one of those people that appreciates a game which gets not quickly, but I don't want to be sat there for that long, and I do want the ability to roll credits in a month or two of the limited amount of gameplay time that I actually get. I don't really want the prospect of sort of 6 months sinking into a game just to see the end. Like that's
Yes.
mad to me.
Nor do you want the feeling that you're taking shortcuts, right? Like, because there are games out there where if you just go like main quest, you will get to the ending faster than the average player. But there are some games that almost make you feel guilty for that, with the way they kind of spread out their progression through the game. You're entering into this new, especially Assassin's Creed, you enter in this new region, you synchronize, your map is covered in points, there are side missions, you're being pulled in every single direction. You can almost feel guilty for saying, no, I just want to see the main story content and the cutscenes. In fact, there have even been Assassin's Creed games in the past. I want to say one of Origins or Odyssey was guilty of this. It might have been Odyssey, where if you did that, you probably would have found yourself under-leveled by the end of the game, because obviously the RPG hooks got even deeper. That's the other thing I think that is becomes a really negative side effect of these overly expansive open world titles.
It almost felt like you were punished for it in some respect. In the last couple of Assassin's Creed games, with the introduction of like the super OP enemy AI, like enemies who would come after you and hunt you down. So if you were in the open world and if you were sort of like trying to make a beeline to follow the main quest, and it's like, oh no, you've got level 30 so and so's coming to kick your ass, and you're not high enough like to take, and then you spend like 10 to 15 minutes hiding from an enemy so that they can piss off, so you can get back on track. Is almost like you're being punished for trying to maybe cut a few corners.
Yeah.
Which is not fun. Like that's not a place you want to be.
No, especially not in a game that will happily sell you an XP doubler, for example, for real money.
Right? Yeah.
Which is, I don't know, that whole thing is fucked. And I think there are elements of that side of Assassin's Creed that we're not going to shake off in a hurry, but at least we will shake off the overbearingly large and guilt-ridden experiences that we've been having with recent titles. Although, Jonesy, I will just say, while we are on the subject of Assassin's Creed spreading itself a little bit thin, they might be course correcting somewhat on a title by title basis with regards to how long they take to beat and how long it takes to see everything that there is to see. They're definitely still not concerned about spreading themselves thin when it comes to the volume of titles they're releasing, though. I've got a factoid in front of me that this year's Mirage is one of at least 6 Assassin's Creed games Ubisoft currently has in development. And in May, the company announced plans to increase the number of staff working on the series by 40% over the coming years, doing so by reallocating staff from other franchises, which ties back into, of course, why titles like Immortals Fenyx Rising are perhaps no longer getting sequels. Now, obviously, this includes things like mobile games, this includes VR games, this even supposedly, according to rumors, includes a standalone multiplayer game. So, in their defense, they are looking for ways to leverage that IP to create different kinds of experiences, but it is still a lot of Assassin's Creed. And it's like, okay, great, you've made them 20 hours long. You're also back to releasing at least one a year, with potentially even other ones and other experiences dotted around too.
Do you know what's funny? I actually saw a tweet today from somebody that said, uh, how did Ubisoft manage to take the concept of ancient aliens coming to Earth, leaving uh, whatever they call them, like icons or whatever, to be found, and a sci-fi story where you're running through real historical locations? How did they manage to make all that boring? Like that sounds like it shouldn't be possible,
Oh,
and they managed it.
well,
So I'm torn. I'm like, I can absolutely see why they're doubling down on Assassin's Creed. I can see why they're trying to create this like idea of this hub world, Assassin's Creed, like overworld, almost like a West world kind of thing where I don't even know how it worked, but where you've got multiple Assassin's Creed stories going on at the same time, and you could enjoy it to your heart's content. But at the same time,
yeah,
if you look at that would be fine if they were nailing it the last 2 or 3 games. Um,
right.
but we'll have to see how it plays out.
And I guess there is some idea of that, right? With that idea of Assassin's Creed Infinity being this weird live service hub that houses all these other experiences. Then you get
Yes,
a bit of Westworldiness, right?
and that's what I mean, not like physically, but yeah, that's how I kind of imagine it. Is this you've got this historical hub world thing where it's like, oh, this is going on over here, Baghdad over here. You can go to Viking times over here. You can, and it'd be super interesting to see how they pull all that together. With with this the Assassin's Creed Infinity, but it's it's a strange thing, and they're obviously putting a lot of time and effort and staff into Assassin's Creed.
Yeah,
Um, which makes sense. Yeah, like it does make sense, I guess. But at the same time, it does make you wonder. it's that what I always think of with something like that. I always think of the story I heard about how after Pitch Black was made and Vin Diesel was talking to the producer, or, with the director, and they were like, "This is our plan going forward for the world of Riddick." And then the next game you had, next film you had was Chronicles of Riddick, and it was like, "Oh, that's all gone." This idea of this brand new franchise taking over, it's going to be massive. We're going to have like 9 films. Riddick's going to be all over the universe doing this shit. And the first one they come out with, you're like, oh, what a load of rubbish. Like, it's done.
Oh god, which I hope Assassin's Creed doesn't fall into. I mean, I'm confident that the quality of the Assassin's Creed games will still stay roughly where they've been in recent years. I just think the real shame here is that I think there are so many other Ubisoft franchises, even if you ignore the ones that have kind of become jokes. Like, I know Beyond Good and Evil 2 is a bit of a running joke at the moment. Skull and Bones is definitely a running joke. But there's absolutely a world to me where you go back to the drawing board and come back with a rejuvenated take on Far Cry, or a rejuvenated take on Splinter Cell, on Rayman, on Prince of Persia, as we've discussed many, which they, to be fair, they are now doing in a kind of a slightly different way. And you become a bona fide hit maker, a hit factory all over again. So when I hear stories about 40% of staff, or a 40% increase in the number of people working on Assassin's Creed, and all of that is coming from different franchises, relocating from other franchises, it bums me out. Well, one thing I will say also before I throw it back to you is that whilst that person whose tweet or whose message that you mentioned about AC getting boring was accurate if they're talking about the games and what it's like to experience them often, totally wrong if they're talking about the story. The story, the ongoing like lineal story of Assassin's Creed, by the time Valhalla ends, is fascinatingly is the most bonkers, bullshit, stupid, ridiculous nonsense that I absolutely adore it.
Fair enough. Yeah, and do you know what? I guess at least they're not trying to get out of it and just go, forget all of that. We've moved on. They're just historical games. Like I have some affinity for the fact that they are sticking with the bonkers story. I don't know. I do think I don't mean this in a mean way, but I do think with Assassin's Creed, there is maybe some aspect which is almost like paint by numbers, which is something which most games don't have the ability to do. So, for example, Mirage is set in Baghdad in a certain time frame. So, actually, rather than trying to develop an entire game world or really intricate level design or whatever, there must be some element where you can effectively get some historians in and say, all right, in the year 1200, what did Baghdad look like? That's what we set in the game. And then you can leave your level designers and the historians and a couple of architects to go off and basically build your world for you and make it beautiful and perfect. And then you can say, okay, we've got the city. Now we're going to put a story into it. And I think a lot of games don't have that luxury because you've kind of got to try and invent a world where you've got to try and come up with the two that go together, right? The story has to fit the world, etc. So maybe they can go out there these days with Unreal Engine 5 and they can build 6 different cities, and then they're all made, and then they can say, right, now we're going to put stories into them, we're going to put side quests, we're going to do how the games are going to function, the mechanics and all of that sort of stuff. So maybe it makes sense for them to double down on Assassin's Creed. Maybe it's like the production route is so well laid out, and so they've got it down pat, so they know what they're doing. But I hope it works. I really do. I hope it pays off. I hope we get some incredible Assassin's Creed games out of it for years to come. I like I said before, I think on a podcast, I love how they even do the historical tours around some of those worlds they make. I think that's wicked. I would love it if it became a thing of like your teacher at school said to you when you were doing about the Egyptians, go and play Assassin's Creed Origins and go and do this level where you go. Like that would be sick. Like
we went to school at the wrong time if they do end up doing that whole set.
Especially with the VR stuff they do now, like with Assassin's Creed VR. Like if they said, go look around the Sphinx in VR in Assassin's Creed, it's the best.
Although,
yeah.
Did you hear that there's one particular content creator I know that you're familiar with who probably would veto having his children play at least one particular upcoming Assassin's Creed game for the sake of historical accuracy?
What is that?
Did you hear about this?
No.
So, one of the games that Ubisoft are working on at the moment is codenamed Red, which is the described as the next big Valhalla-like flagship Assassin's Creed set in feudal Japan.
Right.
There was a rumor that emerged, I'd say about a week ago, like inside the last week, that that Assassin's Creed Red's protagonist is going to be an African samurai, of which, historically speaking, I think there was one famous one called Yasuke, but it's kind of one of those things where, like, yeah, that wasn't really a thing. Like, yes, there's one notable, very famous story of one, but like, if you were a samurai in feudal Japan, there's a 99.9% chance you were,
You're
Japanese.
Japanese. Yeah.
And our old pal the Quartering took a screenshot of that headline and said, "Don't you racist video gamers say a damn thing about this black samurai?" Obviously being sarcastic, predicting what people are gonna
Oh, that's
accuse it. And he says, "Lol, holy moly, gaming is woke beyond repair."
jeez. What's this phrase? Get
Go
woke, go
woke,
broke. Go
yeah,
woke, go broke. That's interesting. Most games, I would say, like, oh, it's a goddamn game. Like, calm down. I suppose you could make an argument with something like Assassin's Creed that because they're so based in historical fact that you could, but then they're based on goddamn aliens. Like, it's a sci-fi game. Like, what? It's not real. If you had the historical part, the historical tour, and they just
Yep.
filled it with bullshit, I would say, yeah, that I would be like,
I thought you were about to say filled it with black people.
no, they just made up stuff. Let's say they just made up, and they were selling it as a historically accurate game tour. Then I would be like, oh yeah, you can't do that. Like that's just trying to trick people for the sake of it. But when it comes to the actual story of the game, like it's all horseshit. Like, what? Come on, what are we talking about?
Yeah. No,
Bizarre.
I agree. I agree.
Jamie, they didn't have women fighting in World War II. What are they doing?
keep women keep you know what, if I want to be able to do a fucking a roulette or a any skill move with my dead Pele Ultimate Team card, I shouldn't have to do it with bloody women on the same pitch. That's the other one that's kicking off at the moment. Is they're about to integrate women's female women football players into Ultimate Team. Ultimate Team being a card-based FIFA game mode which regularly features legends or icons who are dead.
I saw. Okay, maybe this is adjacent to that. I did see something whereby they had, and the reasoning made total sense to me. So they had what's the guy's name? The Swedish, the guy, like, I am Ibrahimovic, whatever his name is.
Oh yeah, Zlatan Ibrahimovic.
Zlatan Ibrahimovic. So they had him and a card of him in FIFA and his abilities, and they had a prominent female player,
Sam Kerr, the Australian striker.
Right, and I think they were comparing physicality for her was like 92 and for him was like 78. And then they compared like a real life picture of both of them and were like, he's this 6 foot whatever roided out like looking tank and she is like half his size. So how would physicality be higher for her, higher for him? But then I think the points made on the tweet were like seem completely reasonable, which is no, you're comparing apples and oranges because it's not the same game. It's like a rating if you had, for example, a welterweight and you were on paper and you were sort of talking about strength, you'd compare welterweights. You wouldn't compare them to a heavyweight. It's apples and oranges. But so from what you're saying, are you now suggesting that you could put them into the same team on the same pitch and they would,
yes,
and she would be stronger and more physical than he would?
No one knows for sure how EA are going to balance that. So my understanding is that no ratings have been revealed yet for this year's actual title, EA Sports FC 24. It's going to get weird to get used to saying FIFA, much like Twitter. So those cards that you saw, Zlatan and Sam Kerr's cards, would have been based on the previous game where they weren't mixed at all. So there would have been no attempt to, like you said, go like have some like pound for pound ideology where it's like, well, okay, if we used Zlatan as a baseline, what would Sam Kerr's then be? But by the same token, no one knows exactly how they're going to manage that kind of stuff. And I can guarantee you there will be, like, I think they're going to mix it in such a way where female cards are viable, which means like high level female cards are going to be, for them to be usable, they have to have certain attributes that are, desirable in game, and they might decide to go the other direction, where like maybe female cards are slightly less physical but slightly faster or slightly more agile. But then even that's a problem because, I mean, statistically, on average, like the fastest male players are faster than the fastest female players, as is true in, say, like, athletics. Generally speaking, like, if we're just talking numbers, I'm not trying to say anything controversial here. Like the world record for the 100 meters.
Dude, you're fine. You don't need to worry about it. Like, I know we know what you're saying. We know what you're saying.
Well, so basically, I don't know how they're going to do it, but at the same time, like I said, like it's a game mode where you're putting together a dream team based on a set what are essentially a digitized form of collectible trading cards, wherein they regularly feature not just retired players but dead players. They often do promos that mix things up where players play out of position. It wasn't that long ago that Petr Cech, the former Chelsea goalkeeper, was one of the best strikers in the game. Like the rules have always been a little bit muddy, in my opinion.
I'm kind of torn because I can. So, for example, like if you just to make it simpler for like my non-sport brain, if there was a tennis game where you had the ability to say pit like oh god, what was her name? Serena Williams, right? The greatest female tennis player of all time, and you could pit her like at her peak, like I don't know what 20, 22, 23, something like that. If you wanted to play her against like an Andy Roddick or a Rafael Nadal or something like that, I can absolutely see that you would want to have a game, be able to play where you just like the player. So you just want to be able to play a game of tennis and they are weighted in a way that makes that a fun, enjoyable experience.
Right.
And I think that's the majority of people that are going to play that would want to experience that. You wouldn't want to have, do you know what, like she's massively underpowered when she's playing these players and she can't like return a serve like she could in an actual game that you see her play it. So I think you'd rather have them balanced more equally.
Mm-hmm.
I could at the same time see the argument for someone to say, but hold on, I actually would be interested to see how Serena Williams would perform against John McEnroe, in his heyday. Just for fun, but the majority of people aren't going to be bothered about that. The majority of people are just going to want to play a fun game of tennis. So I can see why I suppose what I would call it would be like you'd have a catch-up logic for the FIFA game. So you want to minimize the gap to have the fastest female player is, not that much slower than the fastest male player. Like, because otherwise it's just not going to be fun.
Yeah.
Like no one's going to play as those players.
Yeah, if you want to be weird about it, like FIFA has been doing some version of that for ages, where like the speed differential between certain defenders and certain attackers in the game has always been massively skewed. Because if your left winger really was twice as fast as your opponent's right back, then what would once you beat them, once you got past them, they wouldn't be able to catch you up. And so there have always been kind of like rubber banding and catch up mechanics, and some people call it scripting, but like elements in FIFA that have evened the odds so that like a 6'5", like lumbering, meat-headed defender can still sometimes have a chance of catching or making a like last gasp tackle against a 5'4" lower center of gravity possible, extremely agile dribbler. FIFA's been messing with things behind the scenes for a long time, and I don't think this is a big deal, but it's the internet, so it's going to be a big deal to someone, and those who speak loudest,
When I play the Rocky games, I want Rocky to be able to fight Ivan Drago and not get killed in every single fight. So, I can see why.
Exactly.
I can see why they do it.
Yeah, we all like to live out our own imagination in these video games, so why not make it as inclusive as possible? Right, gang? I'm sure everyone in the chat is agreeing with me profusely.
I tell you what, though, it would be interesting, that all having been said, if there was a button you could click for like a simulation mode, and you could put like the best ever, like Spanish side, international Spanish side against like the best ever American female side, and see how that played out. Like that would be interesting.
Didn't that happen the other day? Didn't like an international women's team play like a low-level club and lose like 20-0 or something like that?
I have no idea.
I think it might have been in a friendly, but I think something like that did happen fairly recently.
I don't follow any form of football, so I didn't. No.
Well, the Women's World Cup is going on as we speak, so what better time than now, Jonesy?
Oh, of course it is. I've watched none of it. So there you go.
Wow.
I'm
Wow.
not. I don't watch football. I don't watch
Misogynist
it.
arsehole prick. You're part of the problem.
I don't watch the men play. I don't watch the women play. So there you go.
I've watched you watch football. You lie, scumbag.
Have you watched? Maybe maybe in the World Cup or Euros. I've watched.
There's no way you
bits of
worked at the place that we worked for as long as we worked there without watching a football match.
Oh no! If it was the World Cup or it was the Euros, then I do watch football. Sometimes like that, I watch that sometimes.
It is the World Cup.
But I don't. I've never watched.
I'm yanking your chain.
No, I'm trying to be. But yeah, I know it's just not the same. Don't find it as. I don't find it like the only football I ever watch is the World Cup or the Euros. But I don't really feel the same with the Women's World Cup. I don't know why. It's just
it happens. It happens a lot. It's getting viewership's going up and stadium attendance is going up across the board for women's sports, especially women's football. But there are certain sports where, like, it doesn't make. It's interesting you mentioned Serena Williams. It doesn't make as much difference in tennis. Like, I feel like a lot of people will still sit down and watch like the Wimbledon ladies singles final.
Yeah, 100%. It's because it's no different really because it's two of the greatest players in the game playing each other. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Same a lot of the time, like with UFC, like to go back a couple of years to when I know you were familiar with like the heyday of Ronda Rousey, for example. Like
the women were better. The women were better than the men in those days because they were less technically good, which meant the fights were more insane. No, because they were still like bloody hard, but you would get insane fights where someone would massively outclass someone else and they would beat the shit out of them. Whereas in the men's fights, often you wouldn't have that because they were so well versed and so well practiced that it would be a really dull fight. Whereas the women would just go like suddenly out of nowhere, like Misha Tate fighting who was Holly Holm, and she's like choking her out, and Holly Holm's like trying to flip her off her back, and she can't get off, and you're like, this is insane. And it was so good. Yeah, like fantastic.
And the women's MMA has moved on an incredibly long way, even since Holly Holm and Misha Tate were in the conversation for the bantamweight championship.
Is it boring now? Are they too good? It's gotten boring.
Well, it got boring for a little while because of Amanda Nunes, who was obviously one of the. Yeah, she burst on the scene because she was the one that really put a beating on Ronda Rousey on Ronda Rousey's return, and she was dominant for a long time. She was a 2-weight champion. She was even the person that when the UFC finally cut a deal with Chris Cyborg and essentially created the 145-pound division for her, Amanda Nunes still went up there and creamed her, and they just kept. Amanda Nunes did slip up eventually. She lost to, I think it was Juliana Pena. But even that is like basically seen as a blip. One of those blips that like almost every legend has in their career at some point or another. Yep. Like GSP had a blip. John Jones technically had a blip, although it was he's had a number of blips and they've all been his blips. But in ring, he's had one blip. Anderson Silva had blips. I don't know. Mighty Mouse. Who basically everyone apart from Khabib like slipped up at some point, right?
And then Khabib just said, "What? I don't need to do this anymore. See you later."
Yeah, well, fair. You look at how few people make it out of mixed martial arts undefeated. You look at that and you're just like, fair enough, mate.
Fair enough, indeed. We need another golden age of UFC. It seems like it's not as good these days. But
you say that like this weekend just gone, they had put on one of the best cards on paper, at least a decent in practice, but certainly one of the best cards on paper they've had for a long time. Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje 2 for the BMF title. BMF title is a title that they created. It stands for like bad motherfucker.
Right.
It's literally just a title. They're like, these guys aren't like championship contenders, but they're some of the most entertaining. Like, fuck it, we're just gonna go out there and swinging and banging. And they made a title for that, so fair fucking play.
There you go.
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in mixed martial arts, but not everyone's going to stay up till 3 a.m. to watch it here in the UK. So I'm not going to try and convince anyone. Anyway, Jonesy, we went on too many tangents. We're going to put a bow on this motherfucker. Thank you for being such a wonderful co-host, and especially thank you for letting us indulge in a little bit of conversation about aliens without going crazy tinfoil hat over the top with it.
Yeah, I hope we have got a bit rogue this episode, haven't we? But it's been good. We've branched off. No, it's been fun.
I mean, some people, I don't know whether to believe them, but some people do say they like it when we go rogue. So if you're one of those people, then this is for you. Whether you are watching us live on YouTube, shout out once again to all of you lot. Whether you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, in which case please do say hello. Like I said, the comment section down below might be looking a little bit bare at the time you're watching this video, but it is calling you, it is beckoning you. Say hi, we'll read it. If it's worth responding to in the next episode, we will do that. And of course, you can reach out to us in all the usual ways, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on X, that handle at SuperShow Pod. If you're listening to this on any of those podcasting platforms we talked about earlier, Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, any of those, then please do consider rating us 5 stars. And of course, if you feel moved enough to pledge some money to keep the show on the roads, then that link once again, patreon.com/SuperShow. That's the place to go. Thank you all so much for watching and or listening. Thank you once again, Jonesy, for joining me on this unbelievably overlong and probably slightly tedious venture. And if you haven't been put off by this week, then hopefully we'll see you again for the same thing in the same place at the same time next week. Until then, bon voyage and c'est la vie, and